All right, welcome to today's webinar on re-entering the workplace. We'd like to welcome our speakers for today, Guidepoint Solutions, who will lead us through today's session. Specifically, they will review best practices on reopening buildings and facilities to staff, clients, and visitors. They'll discuss how to develop policies and procedures for those using the buildings, how to navigate various thermal options, and how to assess touchless or frictionless technology that exists for buildings. We'll have 4 speakers today: John Torres, who is the President of Security and Technology Consulting; John Harris, who is the Senior Consultant; Ed Batchelor, who's Regional Vice President; and Bradley Dizik, who is the Senior Managing Director. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen, and we will be sure to review them at the end of the presentation. So with that being said, I will now turn it over to John Torres.
Thank you very much, Tracy, and hello, everyone. Hopefully everyone is doing well out there. Obviously, this is a topic that interests a lot of our clients, and I'm sure many of you. Before we jump into the weeds here, just give you a little bit of background about us and what we do regards to Guidepoint Solutions. So quick company overview. We are a investigative compliance and security consulting firm. And for the most part on the security side, we do a lot of security design with regards to technology and access control, safety type of equipment. We are a global company with about 200 team members. And as you can see on the slide, they're mostly former federal and state prosecutors, agents, a number of forensic accountants, cyber forensic experts, and I won't go down the entire list. But on the security and technology side, we have a lot of employees and professionals with an architect or engineering background. So over to the next slide, some of the markets that we serve. Obviously, we can give you some examples here of architect and engineering, which is, for example, in the city of Richmond at the Civic Center, the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, General Motors. In Chicago, Willis Tower. A number of companies we work for with doing security design for data centers, and Digital Realty is one of our larger clients, not only across the U.S. but internationally in Europe, and that's expanding out to Asia for us too. Education sector: Notre Dame, Stanford, Detroit Public Schools. We also are working with Chicago Public Schools. Energy: BP, Chevron, and then going down through the list, especially right now, we're very busy in the healthcare industry. Merck is one of our major clients, as is Kaiser, and manufacturing, Trico Technology, Microsoft. Over to the next slide, I'll introduce you to our team here. In addition to myself, we have Ed Batchelor, who's our Regional Vice President for the Chicago office. Angela Osborne, who is unable to join us today. She is Regional Director based in Washington, D.C. John Harris, who is one of our senior consultant experts who is in the Chicago office, but he's based in Minnesota. And then Brad Dizik, who is the Senior Managing Director for us based in our New York office. And then going over to the next slide here, some of the clients that we are currently supporting with pandemic solutions, major urban county buildings in the Midwest. And that really includes not only just their county buildings, but their courthouses, office buildings, and warehouses. And what we're doing for them is helping them assess their technology, providing enhanced security procedures, helping them with temperature screening technology and requirements, and then developing expanded screening zones that meet the CDC guidance on social distancing. And then we're also implementing a variety of physical security measures to protect their security operations. We're also helping a nationwide food processing company, and I'm sure many of you have heard that for example, in the Midwest, meat packing plants are the big hotspots right now. We're helping a global credit card company, a national real estate firm, and also a global automotive parts manufacturer. So then over to the next slide, and I'll just touch on this quickly before I turn it over to Ed Batchelor. Some of the considerations that we are taking into account, obviously technology solutions. Most people are very interested in touchless, frictionless technology now. As I think of going into our Guidepost office, when that's reopened, at least the office that I'm based in Washington, D.C., we have a keypad when you walk in. Well, I'm sure a lot of people don't want to have to touch a keypad, especially when we can take advantage of today's technology and use remote technology or Bluetooth technology to actually get you into a building, unlock your doors, and make sure that they meet all the security requirements that people are asking for. We're looking at temperature anomaly detection, contract tracing, and remote intelligence and visitor operations management. We're also looking at the physical and cybersecurity measures, operational plans, policies and procedures and training. And of course, when we do that, we are ensuring that we're doing that in conjunction with your attorneys, your general counsel, your HR department. We want to make sure that we're in compliance with all of the regulations that obviously didn't take the pandemic into account, but even with regards to privacy laws, we have privacy experts here at Guidepost that are guiding us through each of those steps too. And lastly, certainly not least, compliance and investigations. Brad will touch on that for us. A number of things that we're helping clients with that too, and a lot of third rails, red flags that we need to be concerned with. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ed Batchelor, who will start walking us through some of the specific screening solutions and other technology solutions that we can provide.
As John mentioned, there are many aspects of reopening strategies to consider. From a safety and security management perspective, we have to look at this holistically, taking into account technology solutions and physical security measures that can be put in place, and how those measures change or impact your current operations. And on top of that, as mentioned, we need to be compliant with internal, local, state, federal, requirements and guidelines. Especially in this age of thermal technology, gathering data from people that could kind of border on the line of HIPAA requirements and all that stuff. So it takes a real holistic approach of looking at every aspect of individually, but also together. To dig a little deeper, there are two main types of technology. And technology has been at the forefront here of discussions with clients, based on the demand for touchless or temperature screening solutions, to get back into the workplace. For example, Amazon, courthouses, the White House, hospitals, grocery stores, all have implemented some level of screening technology, across the nation and world really, to provide, some level of confidence to its employees and its visitors and its patrons, that they're doing what they can in the workplace, to make it safe and clean. The reality though is that, temperature screening, while it's something that can be done physically, for an invisible, virus that things out there are complications with that and considerations if you deploy that. To dig a little deeper, we have two solutions here up on the screen that are common across all of our clients and what we see out in the market. But first, I think it's important to understand that Guidepost is agnostic to any product, vendor, or service provider out there in the market. We're independent consultants. We are not affiliated with any of these manufacturers. We do not make commissions or sales or anything of that sort. So that allows us to provide, and make recommendations to our clients on products and services and applications that'll meet their needs without influence from others. And so I think that's an important aspect here as we dive through some of these technologies. And you might see some brand names on the screens or whatnot. That's not an endorsement at all of our technology, just a sample of what we see on the market. This a little bit more specifically here, the screening types that are presented here are one is called thermal camera scanning or thermal camera solutions. That's using a thermal camera to assess temperature, skin temperature in an individual. Now, keep in mind, thermal camera technology was not designed for the specific function. However, it's being adapted through different manufacturers for this to occur. Also understand that elevated skin temperature is different than internal body temperature, and that the variances of degrees of temperature of your internal body can be different from your elevated skin temperature. Meaning that if you're outside and walking interior to a lobby or interior to office, you might have an elevated skin temperature based on, a warm summer day or a cold winter day that might skew the results of this screening solution. The reason why thermal camera technology is, from a camera perspective, is on the market is because it allows this screening process to be taken from a safe distance. We keep in mind the CDC recommended guidelines for 6 feet of social distancing. I can accomplish this through thermal camera technology without having to be within arm's reach of the subject for screening. On the other hand are what we're calling handheld non-contact thermal temperature devices. These are the typical small devices that you can find on Amazon or your local pharmacy, that are home grade, that you can, about 1.5 inches or so from the forehead, take a temperature. These require the individual to be within that six foot social distance requirement to take the temperature, which is why we recommend that additional PPE be considered for those individuals that are administering these tests. That's one important aspect of this in terms of how we separate the social distancing aspect of the thermal camera, which has a much longer range, or the, close proximity of, the non-contact, handheld device. Secondly, FDA approved medical devices, big kind of asterisk here on this element that, there's a lot of devices coming on the market, a lot of technology, is being pushed on the market right now. And the reality is that some of it is rebranded products that are, manufactured from a single source or unproven. And it's very important, especially considering, the crisis and the amount of focus there is on re-entering the workplace, that these technology aspects be, very thoroughly researched, proven, tested before deployment. We have done our own internal research on this and come up with, a variety of manufacturers and stuff that at least meet the bar of expectations, but have yet to be fully proven in terms of results that clients are looking for. That could be low false positives, that could range to, multiple people getting temperature taken at the same time, to just understanding that these results are valid and not skewed by any internal algorithm or processes. Next slide here. Oh, it's not advancing. 1 second. Oh, here we go. So some key considerations, a few of I've already mentioned. It must be understood that, thermal screening of any sorts, temperature does not detect COVID-19. It does not diagnose COVID-19. It does not exclude COVID-19 or any other, a virus or for that matter. It is simply taking a measurement of your body's, to your elevated skin temperature. What you do with that, or the criteria you establish with that, whether that's 2 degrees above normal temperature or whatnot, that threshold, that's a decision that should be made internally to your working groups on what you feel is a good threshold to say someone can or cannot enter this workplace, this environment, or this event. We have seen multiple different variations across the board of our clients. Some follow the CDC kind of guideline of 100.4. Others reduce that down a little lower. Others have extended that higher based on just what they feel comfortable with. But it's important to understand that it does not detect COVID-19, does not prevent COVID-19. It's simply a tool that can be used on a layered approach to kind of, make sure that you're doing what you can to build confidence in the workplace, that you're trying to mitigate your exposure and your risk to COVID-19 or other viruses out there that have symptoms of elevated body temperatures, like a fever, for example. If we look through here, some of the other considerations, I won't read through all of them because we're going to cover them a little bit longer, a little bit shorter here in the slide deck, but cost points do vary. Then this is a big kind of question mark for a lot of our clients when looking at what solutions to deploy. They range from $115 handheld thermometer to $35,000, $40,000 per camera, for, solutions. And those solutions range in accuracy, how accurate is it reading from a distance? If you see in the upper right-hand corner box, there's active deployments out there that are experiencing about, 0.5 degree Fahrenheit accuracy. Well, some solutions are actually much higher than that. And so you consider the very short window between, 98.6 degrees and about 100.4 degrees for the CDC. There's not a lot of space there for, inaccuracy issues. Couple that with the environmental constraints of where screening is taking place, to the individual's own body temperature or own lifestyle, where the individual could have been drinking the night before, and that creates increased body temperature. They could be taking Tylenol or Advil that reduces the body temperature, or they could be walking quickly like we do here in downtown Chicago, to our next meeting or next building, and be in an active cycle like working out. So there's a lot of challenges with this in terms of the range of accuracy and false positives, and what do you do with someone that is at that threshold or above that threshold. As I mentioned on the next slide here, there are some advantages. There is the potential that it does deter employees from not coming into the office. They're not feeling well and they know these measures are in place. They're likely to stay home versus coming into the workplace. Also, potentially it boosts confidence, and we've used that word quite a bit so far, in that, there's something being done. I don't think it's going to be common. I know we're going to see it at airports, and I mentioned earlier it's coming across, but the confidence piece of it, the psychological impact to COVID-19, as we're all nervous to be around people, nervous to go back in the workplace, we feel provides, boosts that confidence level that something's being done. It also shows a level of effort. It displays that, organizations are trying their best to attempt to create, a safer work environment. And considering that this is temporary, and that, raises another key point is that when do you stop? And that's part of the overall strategy that must be considered. Once these solutions are deployed, knowing that a vaccine could or could not be, happening here within the next year or plus, when is it appropriate to stop doing temperature screening? And this is something I think the industry is still trying to work around. From an aspect of it, is that after a vaccine's out for a long period of time, or is that at 25% occupancy like some of our clients are doing? Or is that when stay-at-home orders are lifted and essential workers, are no longer the ones in the workplace that are being screened? So there's a lot of variation here on how to deploy the technology. With that come the limitations. Some of these we've already kind of talked to. Again, it does not detect, COVID-19 or any other viruses. Asymptomatic people does not detect, because that individual could have COVID-19 and not be aware. Medicated people, as mentioned before, could have symptoms but be taking medication that lower their temperatures below the established threshold, and false alarms, false read rates, which is why we propose kind of a two-tier process. Part of this has to do with accuracy and throughput. If I use, for example, a thermal camera as my kind of first wave, and people are walking into my office and the camera is measuring their temperature and getting good results, if an individual walks in and has an elevated result, we then go over to secondary screening, where we're using a handheld thermometer to validate that temperature take that was on the original solution is still valid on the second. So there's a little bit extra step in here, and why we do that is, one, to keep the line moving for food processing plants or manufacturing or others that have, work shift change and have to get a lot of people into the building, within a short amount of period of time. And it provides the ability to pull those individuals out of line that might have an elevated skin temperature, do secondary monitoring, or wait 10 to 15 minutes for their body temperature to level set with what is at, the environmental conditions within the facility. Also, limitations are liability and privacy that we're going to touch on here shortly. But there are privacy concerns, borderline with HIPAA and how thermal and how this information is being used. How is it being stored? Is it being stored for how long, and who has access to that information? Plus, there's a lot of testing going on today of these solutions, but there isn't enough on the market with few independent tests to really, hone in on a solution or product that is proven. I mentioned that in the onset that there's a lot of stuff out on being deployed today that people are learning as they go. And I think that's part of the challenging aspect of these solutions. Big picture though, from a technology perspective, touchless access is also, a large consideration. As John mentioned, we have offices that have keypad access control. Is that something that we want to maintain, or do we want to look to change out in the future because it requires us to touch? And this is where, access control solutions that are, that are kind of leading this effort on, app-based or web browser-based, or any activation I can do from my phone because I can control my phone. I know who's touched it. I've cleaned it myself and whatnot. Those allow the, the activity of opening a door remotely from occurring, plus just down to the door hardware itself, automatic door openers, waving in front of a sensor that opens the door, to, from like a curb to suite perspective of thinking the workflow through. In elevators, can I call an elevator without having to touch the button? In, restrooms, how do I open a restroom door without having to grab the handle? All of these thoughts have to be laid out in kind of the average workflow of what can I do to make things touchless in the short term, as well as plan for the long-term strategy of implementing these solutions. Some of the other things that we've seen, and have worked with clients on is robotics. Right now with a lot of buildings being, empty or closed, they traditionally would have, contract security officers doing their patrols. But since then, they've dispatched robots to do that, nightly and daily patrols as a cost savings measure, as well as there's no issues with, 6 feet of separation or, putting, individuals, in that harmed range of potentially having exposure to COVID-19 when, the robots are there doing that task. Not sure it's a long-term solution, but the short-term aspect right now, that's being beneficial, along with, electronic visitor management. Contact tracing is going to be key, to solving the challenge we face. And understanding who was in your office or your building or your property via, a searchable analytic system will provide, much more intuitive, quicker, easier, faster methods of saying, hey, Ed Basher was at my facility on Tuesday. We potentially had an exposure case. We need to notify these individuals to see if they came in contact. All that information is centralized and readily available to those individuals to perform that contact tracing. It's very important to capture, who's going where and what and when, so that if you have to do a level of contact tracing, that information is available. On top of that, that supports some of the analytical models that are out there for using video cameras for like social distancing, drawing virtual circles around people to make sure that they're staying 6 feet apart, or using that information for occupancy modeling. How populated are my offices, my buildings, when are they populated, and can I, use that data to influence how I do back to work strategies of staggering shifts, staggering offices, staggering departments to make sure that I'm keeping my occupancy down to a maintainable amount based on social distancing and local requirements. And the last year, before I turn over to John Harris, is drones and remote intelligence. It sounds, far-fetched, but drones lately actually have come into, use, a little bit more, day-to-day use than traditionally, just based on doing, surveillance of large, properties, campuses, and whatnot from a distance. Of course, one must also consider all the rules and regulations around the use of those, but we do have clients that are deploying these technologies to, monitor their sites that are very low occupancy right now without having to have, again, the human interaction, the presence and whatnot, the staff, to do it that, potentially become exposed. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John Harris, who's going to go through the physical and cybersecurity, as well as a lot of the operational considerations that will be required in order to support some of these technology solutions. John?
Great, thanks Ed. John Harris here, and what I want to do is now that Ed has laid out the technological components and considerations and gone into some detail on how we're seeing them applied in the workplace today, now let's take a look at operationally, how would you deploy those, or what considerations are necessary to review in order to infuse those technologies into the way that you may operate on a day-to-day basis. So one of the first things to look at is knowing that this is an issue where, physically transmitted between individuals, where is that likely to happen? So looking at how either your work area or your business interfaces with the public. So where are those points where people are going to come into contact with other people? Where do you have public-facing interaction points? So in the commercial real estate space where we operate extensively, or in healthcare, you have waiting rooms, you have lobbies, you have parking lots, you have these places where people would congregate. I think about, and I use grocery stores as an example because it's the one place where everyone has still been able to go to, and the reconfiguration of the way we shop and the way we do groceries, I think, is an interesting use case that can be applied across the different operational spaces. So now you have, stickers on the floor in the queuing lines where it's telling you where you should social distance. You have certain places that, smaller grocery stores that limit the amount of occupants that they can have at any given period of time. So wait outside in your car and we'll tell you when you can come in and be ready. Some of that is being done over technology where you can check in, like in the healthcare space, you check in and then wait in your car rather, until you get a notification saying your number's up, you can come in. So you're seeing it used in some of the essential businesses that have been at this now for a couple months, and those lessons can be learned and applied into other areas. So now looking at your current security technologies, Ed touched on some emerging technologies or some newer technologies that could potentially be retrofitted or that are being leveraged to build up and help secure. We also want to look at what do you have now that can be reimagined or reconfigured in order to support these needs going forward. So looking at access control and card readers and card access, you already have a mechanism in place possibly that gives you data, like Ed mentioned, for the contact tracing of where everyone is going on a day-to-day basis. So if John Harris calls in and says, hey, I got a fever, I'm going to go get checked out, and it turns out that I come down with COVID, now you can run a tracing report to that reader that tells me everybody who contacted that reader in the last 2 days around the times that I did, or all the readers. And these are actual report tools that some of the manufacturing, access control manufacturing companies are producing and giving for free, that you can just load into your existing system, pull out that report, and now you have that data. So, before we rush out and buy the $30,000 thermal cameras that may or may not actually resolve your problem, you can look at the technology that you have in place and see if you can leverage that to at least get you to from where you're at today to a little bit better, and then determine where that gap is to great, and what that cost benefit is on what problem are we trying to solve, what's the cost of getting to perfect, or if you even can get to perfect, and how do we reduce that with some improvements. And lastly, and maybe most importantly, and we'll talk about this a little bit more on the next slide, is the standards and deployment of the technology and the processes and the procedures. So the most important part about deploying any security technology, specifically the thermal technology, is what are you going to do when somebody comes back as having a fever? So you scan them, and now what? And so they come in at 101. So what are you going to do, and what's your plan, and how exactly is that going to go? What data are you going to collect? How are you going to communicate that to them? If you're a public organization like a Department of Motor Vehicles or a courthouse, how do you manage that? Courthouses is one of the most challenging ones we're working with right now, or municipalities, where let's say I'm coming to to divorce court, or I'm coming to do something that's already emotionally charged, and then I'm going to have a fever and I'm going to get turned away. How do you manage that? How do you deal with that? So those are all things that have to be thought through and developed, and then consistently applied and deployed across your entire enterprise. There was a question that came into the Q&A, and I think this is the right place to talk about it, is the kind of origin of the technology that we're using. So from a cybersecurity perspective, any of the technology that's being put out into the field, we want to make sure we're doing robust assessments to understand, is it secure? Does it need to be networked? If not, don't do that. And does the manufacturer have solid history, experience? Have they developed it? And are we going to be exposing ourselves to any issues or challenges should we deploy it? So it's not just China that could be developing some technology that we might not be comfortable with, but there's a lot of people just popping up, throwing technology out there with fancy titles and great videos. And if you don't do your due diligence, you might be exposing yourself to more harm than good. And so ensuring that you have that cybersecurity hygiene applied is important as well. On the operational side, I covered this a little bit, but what's critical is to communicate out to your stakeholders, your employees, your customers, your clients, the population, the public, whoever you engage with, what you were doing. Is your queuing going to slow down by 50% and your wait times go from 10 minutes to 2 hours? You got to let people know that. It's going to be disruptive, and you have to communicate that that's what it's going to be, and not try to hide from that. It'll make everything a much more, I think, positive experience overall if people know what they're getting themselves into. I waited outside of a restaurant last night for 45 minutes. They told me my food would be ready in 5. If I would have known it was going to be 45 minutes, I probably wouldn't have had a problem with it. But because they told me 5 and it was 45, it was a bit of a frustrating experience. And so you can avoid that. I think I'll hone in on just a few places here. The screening protocols. So we're seeing a lot of push to virtualize that. I talked about it a little bit already about having people, opt in to taking questionnaires and notifying their arrival preemptively before they come on site, and screening them over kind of a self checklist that they would fill out either on their phone or online before coming in. A lot of companies already do that for visitor requests and access control, and they're just repurposing it for this application and embedding within it the questions associated with COVID and the health questionnaires associated with that. And lastly, looking at some of those other aspects of the activities, guidance on PPE. Are you going to require everyone to wear masks? Are you going to supply it to certain parts of your business? How are you going to manage that? How the package and delivery process, does that need to be reimagined or rediscussed at all? And then any sort of reporting from your employees that you're going to do. We've seen a couple of companies be really imaginative with the way they're embracing reporting tools and having the employees, report information to them, kind of take their temperature themselves at home. Don't come into the office if you don't have to, and build up this confidence in employee welfare, where they're really walking the walk and saying, this is about your health. We don't want you to come in unless you need to and you're not sick, which is a bit of a pivot from, I think, our overall workforce culture, where you kind of wear pulling yourself into work, whether sick, tired, whatever, as a badge of honor. That's something that we're seeing that culture have to shift in a lot of organizations and being woven into this overall approach. And I think that isn't something that's going to change anytime soon. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Brad here, as he's going to dive into the compliance investigations component.
Thanks, John. And as you can see from the PowerPoint, one of the things that we can help businesses do is to put together and design and monitor a dashboard to track any mandatory or optional measures that your business takes. There's CDC guidance, there's FDA guidance. For those of you who live in Michigan, you know that Governor Whitmer put out an executive order that spells out different requirements that would be necessary for essential businesses to operate, but once non-essential businesses are allowed to reopen and operate, what are those obligations going to be? And we can help you put together one of those dashboards to track and measure what your obligations are and whether you are compliant. Along the same vein, we can also work with the businesses, and this is something that you're going to want to do, is to test compliance. So going to the physical security measures, questions around 25% capacity. Are you really at 25% capacity? Are you below 25% capacity? And perhaps you can increase that so that you can make do a little bit more business during this time. Perhaps there's also the possibility that you're above 25% capacity and you're not compliant and you're at risk, for one of the authorities to come and knock on your door. With physical security, are people actually using the touchless entry? Are they touching the physical asset? Are they staying within 6 feet of each other? So those are things that we can help come in and test to make sure that you're maintaining compliance. There's also questions if you use thermal imaging around, as was discussed earlier, privacy laws and HIPAA requirements. Also, a lot of folks are asking, how are we going to stay in business? How are we going to afford to do these type of measures? A lot of different good financial options are available, whether those are through loans or grants. The CARES Act, for example, offers the Paycheck Protection Program. There's also the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, which could be a grant up to $10,000. There's the SBA Express Loan, which is a loan that can immediately be provided to you for up to $25,000. And then there's actually an SBA program for debt forgiveness, where the SBA pays off around 6 months of your principal and interest on various small business loans. There's also private opportunities to secure financing to support the ongoing operations of your business. Some of the things that you're going to want to consider either way is, if you're a lender in those situations or an investor, you're most likely going to want to do some sort of due diligence of the borrower to make sure that they either have an ability to repay, or even in the context of forgiveness, that they are going to be able to stay in business after you give them the loan, to make sure that it is achieving the greatest amount of value. As far as the borrower is concerned, there was recent news, Treasury came out with a question and answer yesterday that's saying that everybody who made a representation or certification to receive a PPP loan, if it was under $2 million, they will have been assumed to have operated in good faith. You're still going to need to request forgiveness and prove that you use the money in the right way, and you can be allowed to forgive the loan through the SBA. So you're going to want to put together a package that proves that. But if you did take out a loan that's more than $2 million, you're going to want to go a little bit beyond that and prepare yourself for an examination or an audit by the federal government. Similarly, there's a False Claims Act. So any certifications that you make to, say, receive a Main Street loan from one of the Fed lending facilities, or another one of the SBA loans, you're going to want to make sure your certifications are accurate, because if they're not, you face liability under the False Claims Act, which includes something called treble damages. And treble damages mean that if you receive, say, $1 million, your penalty is going to be a minimum of $3 million. So it's 3 times the amount that you borrowed. We can also help provide diligence of any product suppliers. So as John and Ed discussed, a lot of folks are going to want to source thermometers or thermal imaging or other technology from vendors. There's been a lot of instances, particularly from China, where the product that comes back into the United States either doesn't work or is pretty much fraudulent. So one of the things that we can do is we can help vet and do diligence on any of the vendors that you are proposing to procure the products from, the technology from. We can also work to identify vendors for you to make sure that you're getting a product that actually will provide you with value and help with your security design. Next page, please. So as things develop, new technology is being created. America is an engine of innovation. New questions of how best to protect your assets, to protect your employees, to protect yourself are constantly being asked and solutions being offered. We can work with you to continually assess your needs, as new best practices reveal themselves, or what I refer to as next practices start to be defined. We can work to make sure that you are best serving your customers, tenants, and visitors to effectively operate your business. We can help you develop a roadmap that covers the key areas that are necessary for compliance. One of the important things is to not only think about this in terms of economic loss mitigation once you are allowed to reopen, but also how do you reinvigorate confidence in your consumer, your employees to return to work. So it's an important question to ask, and it's a good idea to develop a roadmap on how to get there. Make sure you evaluate your situation and change as needed. You need to have flexibility. There's a lot of talk in the media about professional sports leagues reopening. As they reopen, there's discussions around how to test and how to test non-invasively so that you can identify somebody who may be positive of COVID-19 before they enter a facility and expose others. So that is one area where there's going to be evolution in ways to design environmental controls using security design. And lastly, or not least, remember to be flexible, think outside the box, and that this is no more normal than we're used to. So hopefully we get back to normal shortly, but in the meantime, it's important to adapt and be flexible and do what we can to keep everybody safe and healthy.
Great. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I'll give a few minutes for anyone to come through.
Well, we wait for the Q&A to open. Ed, maybe I'll pose a question to you. We've seen a lot of the thermal technologies and coming from all over the place, out of the woodwork, and different levels of accuracy and being able to catch people walking by, crowds of 30 people. What are your thoughts on just a couple things that we need to think about, or that we would recommend, like the top 2 to 3 considerations when looking at those types of technologies that are really necessary to make sure you're not getting taken for a ride when you're looking to deploy something like that?
No, good question, John. I think, part of it has to do with, first of all, is looking at products, that come from manufacturers that are established. There are some manufacturers that, their bread and butter is thermal technology, and those should be, considered, as probably a little higher degree than the rest, because, this is what they do. There are, like I mentioned earlier, there are a ton of different products coming out that are just relabeled, OEM products that are rebranded, by another company or another group or another association. And it's really clouding the market on what's out there, what's proven. The other aspect of that is that, the FDA has a process for, clearing, these products. And, those products should be FDA cleared, and have that certification, available. So that, when we look at different technologies and stuff, if it hasn't passed that level of sniff test, then maybe it shouldn't be considered. And I think lastly, it's, the cost, value, or the cost versus benefit. Like I mentioned, there are solutions out there that are really expensive, but is that something that the individual or employee or company needs? What's their throughput? What's their activity levels? Is, a single camera solution that, does, one person every 6 seconds perfect for their situation? Or is there a solution out there that can handle more than that at a singular time? Like in the manufacturing of food processing and rail plants, where we're trying to get 600-700 people into a facility within a short amount of time. Once you kind of step through those 3 kind of layers, now you can start self-identifying products and solutions out there that, we're going to meet your needs. From that point on, it comes to the price point. And the temporary status of it. Is it worth spending $40,000 on a solution that is supposed to be temporary. What do we do with it afterwards? Some of those are the aspects of what I would look for in this technology.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think the repurposing or permanency is something that is a really important consideration. I've talked to a few organizations, I think I mentioned this earlier, that see this as a permanent employee health and welfare plan where it's never a good idea to have someone with a temperature come into the workplace, and so this is going to be a permanent update that they make as part of their overall corporate culture. Others will take it down as soon as they feel it's safe and they don't need it anymore. And so looking at the investment point that you put into it and the fit for your organization and the culture, I think is really important. All right, looks like we got a question came in from Claudia. I'll read the question out loud, and then maybe John and Ed and Brad, if you want to respond to it, we can do it that way. So the question is, what type of guidelines do you think, if any, will be put into place for employees that have elevated temperatures? For example, what will not be allowed into a work facility? Will sick days be forced? Will this be left up to organizations to define, local, federal government? So maybe John or Brad, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is John here. So obviously, any type of policy or procedure that you're going to put into place with regards to an HR-related issue, as I see some of this here, is that you'll have to do it in coordination with HR and your general counsel, and if you don't have one, then maybe your external counsel. But you'll have to first of all ensure that you're going to be in compliance with HIPAA if you're collecting that type of information and it's not anonymized, which is the first issue that we'll have to consider if you put something like this into place at your company or you're recommending that to potential clients. And then with regards to enforcing 6 days and whether or not it's going to be left up to organizations or local federal governments, obviously, depending on the area or the industry that you're working on, there may already be guidelines or regulations in place. So you have to take a look at those first and make sure, similar as I mentioned earlier about privacy restrictions, making sure that you're in compliance with all of those. Brad, I'm not sure if you want to add to that there.
Yeah, let's think about it in the context of, do you have a court date? Say you have a court date, you're going to court, you get to the entrance of the facility, they take your temperature and you have an elevated temperature, and you're not allowed to go in the courtroom. Well, how is a judge going to handle that situation? Are they going to exclude you? Are they going to hold you in contempt? I don't know, and I don't think anybody really does know yet, but I think to some level, there's going to need to be some federal or local guidelines on how to handle those type of situations. It also overlaps with employment laws in the workforce. If you do identify somebody who has an elevated temperature and you exclude them from coming to work, how do you handle that situation? There's going to need to be some sort of protections or guidelines for that employee at the same time for the employer who excludes the employee. So I do think that, on a base level, there is going to be guidelines from the federal government and more particularly from states. I think that's going to be needed to be supplemented by businesses depending on their specific situations and circumstances.
Great. Well, I think that wraps up most of the Q&A that have come in. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for Guidepost for your time and expertise this afternoon. And with that being said, thank you for attending and wish you all a great day. Thank you on behalf of Telemus.